into our calls, but that's okay.
That's fine. That's fine.
So this morning because obviously the last couple of days we were chatting about, what were we going to talk about, and one of the things that I think keeps cropping up, and particularly on the pages that we look at around dyslexia, and particularly obviously because so many children are at home now. I know the schools in the UK are open, but it looks like still many children are not going back into the school.
Well, it was only 2 year groups that were going back. Obviously, vulnerable, children of vulnerable, children of key workers and vulnerable children have been in school. But no, it was only 2 years. But I think only about a quarter of the ones who could have gone back have actually gone back.
Olive says, always lovely to listen to you both.
Olive, hi.
Olive's joining us this morning, which is fantastic.
That's wonderful.
Yes, and obviously here in Ireland, the decision was made. That's it, not opening till September. And so obviously, again, millions of children all around the world are, still at home, and parents are still trying to homeschool.
Sure.
And some are successful, and some are really, really struggling. And obviously, that's the whole reason why we decided to give our online course for parents completely free, in order to just have some sort of input and to help people in some way, shape or form. And we've had a great uptake. I have to say, we've had lots and lots of
it's been amazing, hasn't it? So many people. But
we
would love to hear from anybody who's tried it out. We have had some very, very positive feedback, comments, but please write to us, talk to us, let us know how it's going.
And I've just seen a lovely plastic bottle of water behind me, and I know when I watch things online, I'm like, why is that there? No idea why that's there. That seems to have appeared out of nowhere. So and one of the things that I still see a lot of comments around is, well, what's the point in learning how to spell when we have technology?
Yeah, there's technology, there's spell check, there's all the
you have the red wiggly line to guide you, and we really want to talk, because for us, and we did ask ourselves this question, well why is it, and do we really need to spell according to the conventions that we've got in the English language at the moment? And we really threw that open, didn't we? Well, why can't we just let it go? What is the importance of learning how to spell through THROUGH? Why couldn't we just spell it in a way that is phonetic, that makes sense for us? And I think we did play around with the idea that let's just let people spell in the way that they can, whatever way.
And why decry it? Why call people stupid or lazy or silly, whatever, just because they can't spell? Because it really isn't that high on the list of priorities in terms of being kind of an intelligent human being, one would think. Says the lady who gets so angry when people put an apostrophe in the wrong place, but we'll park that for a minute. But
this is not about us personally.
Not about us, but
we were asking a general question.
Thinking philosophically, why couldn't we do that, and just take away that whole stigma around not being able to spell correctly? Wouldn't that be wonderful in a way? But then other problems came in, didn't they? And so how do we know the difference between there and there? Because obviously the homophones that we've got in English are
in our language, in the English language, and it's not just English. I know in French it's the same as well, where you have the words that sound the same are either spelt differently or certainly have different meanings. That really is the key here. And I know, because my mom's a teacher, and if she's watching, hi mum. Is that when she was teaching, many years ago in the 60s, one of the things that came out was, don't correct spelling.
Yes, I remember that. Yeah.
Because it prevents the flow in terms of creative thinking and everything else. And of course, I'm sure have seen this as well, is when I've worked particularly with adults who are struggling with spelling, actually it stops the flow.
It does, and it also restricts the words that you use, because you find people who are not confident in spellers, they won't use the word enormous, they'll use the word big. And of course this has a huge impact on children growing, because they're not using the vocabulary that's going to challenge them. So they're restricting their vocabulary. And then of course that affects their reading, that affects their verbal communication, and all sorts of things happen because of that.
Yeah, and again, and that has that massive knock-on effect then with confidence, and you know, they're perfectly capable of explaining themselves verbally, and can talk around things, an incredible maybe vocabulary, you know, that way. But when it comes to writing and actually expressing themselves that way, it's still very difficult. And you know, a lot of people think, well, there's videos and there's everything else, but we still have the written word. The written word is still very much a huge part of how we communicate and how we record information, and emails, and even, you know, even text messages. I know we have predictive text and everything else, but sometimes my predictive text really changes not just the spelling of the word, but the entire word, and the whole sentence means something completely different.
And it is, you know, useful because we are living in the real world that we have today. And in fact, literacy has become even more important. So you find that even more jobs are requiring a particular level of literacy. Whereas, you know, in previous years, you know, you could get away with, not get away with, but, you know, it was perfectly capable of having a good job, a good career, without having those sort of literacy skills. And it's so much more important now. So much is hanging on it. So much, it's really, really high stakes.
Yeah. So, you know, it's not just from our own personal point of view that we're saying actually spelling is important. You know, really genuinely, when you take a big step back and you actually look at the role of spelling, not just in spelling, but actually in reading and in understanding and in writing, you know, we really do advocate that being able to spell is important. And there is another way, that if the way that the child is being taught, or the way that as an adult you were taught maybe at school, you know, if it didn't work, there is another way. It's not that it's impossible. And that's what we love about what we do.
And I think that is the beauty of it, because having been around, you know, for many decades, teaching spelling and reading, in, you know, using so many different programs and different approaches and so on and so forth, it wasn't until later in my career that I came across the NLP. We always mention neurolinguistic programming, Robert Dilts's work, how important it was to have that mental image. And he sort of gave us the why people can't spell and what it is that good spellers are doing. But it wasn't actually until Olive, hi Olive, till I met you after I'd retired, unfortunately, where we really got the how. And it isn't that difficult for, you know, the vast majority of students. I mean, I think my failure rate is 0 point something, you know, because a lot of people can really get it and get it quite easily, and surprisingly easily. I mean, it's tragic, because I've had, you know, parents literally bursting into tears in my room, because they've got, well, why have we struggled for so many years when they can just do it like that, you know.
And then what I love is when a child has been struggling for some time, and then you show them, you know, this way, and they go, oh, that's what you're supposed to do. Oh, I can do that. I can do that one.
And why didn't somebody tell me before? That's all I needed to do. And sometimes it is that quick. Sometimes it isn't that quick, and it takes a more extended period of time. But for many people, it can be that quick, because it's the missing link of how you do it. And if you look at all the different programs that have gone through, you've got synthetic phonics, you've got analytic phonics, you've got the look and say, you've got the IPA, the International Phonetic Alphabet that was used at one point. It's so frustrating, because now I know, you know, thank you, Olive, I know the underlying missing link.
Absolutely. So will we get people to play along? Shall we?
Oh yes, let's see why spelling is important and what we can do about it.
Okay, so let me, this always happens, so let me go from the beginning. Okay. So we're going to get everyone to play along with this, and we've used this in plenty of trainings between here and the UK, Ireland and the UK. And I know there's a few other things floating around where you have, you know, the letters of the words are all round the wrong way, or you're using numbers instead of letters, and the brain can eventually kind of make sense of it. But actually, specifically because of the English language, the way we have so many words that have multiple meanings and multiple spellings, we really wanted to show how important spelling actually is. So try reading this. How are you getting on? Let's see how people are doing when it comes to this. Well, I know everyone was looking. Last time I used this, it was quite. I always watch the audience.
Yes, I do too.
So it's quite hard because I can't see the audience today. Just to see their faces in terms of what's happening. And normally it's this, what, you know, and all the way through right to the very end, it can be extremely tough. So however you got on just there, now we want to just show you the right way.
Yes, it's interesting sort of noticing what's happening inside your brain as you do it, because I was sort of pretending I was seeing it for the first time. I had a problem with U's.
Yes.
The EU, because I had so much a picture of U's, and I to remember that it was actually a sheep, and I got, you could feel the kind of connections firing off inside the brain about pictures of animals and what is it and does it, and how does that fit into that? So
what's a sheep doing in here?
Yeah, yes, a little sparks coming up in your brain. So it's fascinating to sort of take that step back and think, well, what is happening inside my brain? What am I hearing? What am I seeing? What's going on there?
Absolutely. And even though we both know this process, you know, we tackle things differently, and we're always investigating each other's mental processes to see, well, what happens inside your mind, you know, when you see this or when you are doing, you know, asked to do something. And invariably it is different, because not everybody's brain is wired the same way. We are all completely different. But there are some skills that essentially people who are really good at spelling and reading are using, and people who are not so good at spelling and reading are not using those specific skills. They're kind of assumed to automatically develop, or therefore if they don't automatically develop, there's a problem and you're never going to be able to do them.
There's something wrong with you. Yeah, if you're not learning in the way that, you know, and we say, oh, clever child, don't we? You know, clever boy. Oh gosh, you're so bright, you're so clever. And we equate being able to learn to spell and read with intelligence, as if I don't know. It makes me mad.
Yes, okay, it's all right.
Calm down.
But we know, and the research is just so evident, is that those with dyslexia, you know, often have a much higher IQ. You know, going alongside this. So we've always said, you know, and I know for you, because you were actually at the coalface, you were either in the classroom or you were a head teacher, you know, working within the school system. How many of these children were so bright and so articulate and so creative and so clever in other ways, you know, and able, and yet something that if you can do it, it seems so simple and so straightforward. You're thinking, you know, how many times have you seen that word? How many, you know, you've literally just seen it and you've decoded it correctly, and now you're on another line, and it's as if it's a brand new word. So this real frustration and confusion.
And you can see that frustration. I think my big sort of wake up call really was when I was teaching adult literacy, and that was a huge wake up call for me, you know, because you could see these people who were so bright, so intelligent, you know, some of them set up their own businesses and so on, but they just hadn't learned to read and write. And you just think this is really not acceptable.
And it's just confusing, because it's not because people haven't worked hard enough, whether it's their teachers or their parents or themselves, you know, and we know that. We know that it's definitely not, you know, that's why we did the whole talk about motivation and why some children might look like they're lazy. And it's this whole thing, if you could just, I saw a very funny little meme yesterday. I actually should have shared it on our site, and it was, you know, sort of, if you could just concentrate for 5 minutes, you'll get it done. And then it's kind of someone just looking at the ceiling an hour later, you know, completely demoralized because their child has still.
That's right. Oh gosh, I'm laughing, but it's so true, because you get children who just are trying so hard, And you see little faces of 4 and 5-year-olds who, they're just looking at, and at that they can see that the child next to them has just got it. Yeah. And those messages, as we were talking a few weeks ago about how those beliefs are formed. That child can, she looks at the board and sees the word goat, and immediately can just, oh yes, I can write that down. And for the other child, it's just such a struggle, and they're trying. You can see the little hearts. They're putting their heart and soul into it, and they just can't do it. And it's not acceptable to just say, well, they've got a deficit, or they've got, because we need as teachers to find a way through. It's our responsibility to find, well, what's going on there? Why can't they do it? What's missing? I think you had a lovely phrase, didn't you? What is it that I
said, so when I came across my first cohort of students, who most of whom were diagnosed with dyslexia, my question to myself was, what is it I don't understand and I don't know, that if I understood that and I knew that, I could help these children to succeed? And because I kind of asked that question, my brain was searching for it. I was extremely lucky that I met Olive that year, and heard her talk about this, and it really was, that was this kind of ding. Okay, my attitude was not what's wrong with these children and what do they need to do,
exactly.
How do they need to work harder, and they just need to kind of apply themselves, and that's so frustrating, because we've worked with hundreds of families,
absolutely,
who are they can't put any more effort in. In actual fact, I remember doing a talk last year on TV here. I was interviewed, and it was about summer learning loss, and I was because we are very concerned about the time that is now being missed at school.
Oh gosh,
who were already struggling beforehand, and now are missing all of that instruction.
Yeah.
Very, very worrying. But unfortunately, a lot of the feedback I got from that was, look, we've got to the end of the year. We have literally crawled through, the months of homework and extra work, and maybe going to a tutor, and let's just have the summer off.
Absolutely.
For it to be for spelling and reading to be such hard work, and for it to be so painful.
Oh, and it is painful, because you see them really screwing, the forehead, because they're working so hard, not in the brain, not in the most effective, efficient part of the brain. They're really struggling here, and so tired. And children with dyslexia are exhausted, even by lunchtime, let alone at the end of the day. And so, yes, it's this extra work and the extra effort, and just keep putting it in. And I think if we could say to parents, there's not our, including Olive in this, because this was essentially Olive's system. It really is different.
Yeah.
It excites children, because it's using things that they already know. It's using things that they enjoy doing, their strengths. It's not like slugging away through toe by toe, or any of the other, incessant worksheets and word searches. Well, I know we did
drilling,
search, but anyway, there's drilling, there's constant drilling. It's a very different kind of upbeat process to use. So it is different. But yeah, that exhaustion of struggling with the spelling is just too much. And then, of course, it has that knock-on effect for all the other subjects, because if you can't write in science, you can't write in history, you can't write in... It has... Anyway, enough of the negativity. There is an answer. There is an answer.
There is an answer. And we just want to show you actually, how do you map reading and spelling actually onto the brain? So we I think right at one of our very first videos, we talked about the 3 areas of the brain that actually light up when a fluent reader is reading. So this is from fMRI scans done by Sally Shaywitz over in Yale University in the States. And so we can map across actually the fact that there are 3 main areas that are being used. So obviously with spelling and reading, it is a visual system, in the sense that it's what you're seeing. So it's the actual letters, how they are put together, creating the word. So the orthographic component. And we have obviously the phonological component, how does that word sound? And then we have the semantic component, what does it mean? So those are the 3 areas that actually light up. Now, we haven't included handwriting, which obviously is a physical act, and that you know, we do cover that on the course, but we just want to talk specifically about spelling and reading in terms of the visual element of it, the orthographic part of it. What does it sound like, and actually what does it mean? So if we just go back another couple of videos as well, and if you haven't seen this, you know, we really do encourage you to go back and have a look at the working memory video where we talk about the different elements within the working memory and how they coming together. Now, there are lots of different elements, but actually we're just going to focus on really 3. So we have this visual cache. So when you see a word, or when you're going to spell a word, then this is what Robert Dilts discovered, was that good spellers could see words inside their mind's eye. So this is the mental imagery component. And you're recalling visually, what does it look like? Now, some really, really good spellers will argue that they don't see words. And our kind of explanation for that is that they do, but it's so fast, it comes in and out. They're just left with a knowing. They're certainly not sounding out. They just know that these are the letters that are in the word. Then you have the phonological component, which is the loop. So if it's a familiar word, obviously you've got your auditory memory of what that word sounds like. And yes, we do need a system for decoding when it comes to new words that you've never seen, and also that you've never heard before. And I know Olive tells the story of you know, trying to pronounce the word quinoa. You know, and I know personally, I was pronouncing quinoa. It was a bit like we've started watching all the Harry, you know, because we're in lockdown, we're watching all the Harry Potter movies again. And when I read the books, it was Hermione. And then eventually watched the movies and it was Hermione. And I'd never heard that name before. So it's a guess at best. If you've never heard it before, no one's actually told you the pronunciation, it is always a guess. And it's the same when you're, you know, if you're hearing something for the first time and you haven't seen it, obviously it's a guess at best, particularly in English. And then of course we have the semantic component. What does the word mean? And that, it's so complex, isn't it, Paula? I mean, we were kind of going, how do we kind of in one kind of sentence encapsulate, well, what does the semantic component actually do? And of course it uses multiple areas of the brain, because it's depending on, well, is it a concrete noun? You know, if you say the word elephant, well, everyone goes elephant. Okay, so if you know what that word means, you've heard it before and you've seen an elephant, straight away you're going, oh, okay, I know what an elephant is. I don't quite know why you're talking about one, but yeah, okay, I get it. Whereas if you say a word like, I don't know, bother, you know, you go, okay, I kind of know, but where's the rest of the sentence? You know, what's the context? How are we getting? And then you've got really abstract words, you know, all the prepositions, is like his and hers and this and that, and you know, they're so abstract, they don't really mean anything until you have other words around it. Would that be on the right track there, Paula?
Yes, certainly. I mean, because you know, they are really quite difficult. The in, on, under, you know, through. There's quite a lot of early teaching that goes on with that. So with visuals and little diagrams and things like that. So and you know, you get them to explore and go under things and over things and lots of stories. And yeah, so you're developing that ability to construct meaning in the brain.
So it's your vocabulary, basically, at the end of the day.
It's building up the vocabulary and the meaning.
And your own inner dictionary, I suppose.
Yeah.
Part of it. And again, like any good dictionary, you know, you can look up a word and it's got lots of different meanings depending on, sometimes it's a noun, sometimes it's a verb, you know, and it sounds the same or it looks the same. It just depends on where it's being used. And often, from what I can understand, when only synthetic phonics is being used, it's often divorced from the whole word and the meaning. It goes in purely through the sound system.
Yes, that's right, because the idea behind it is that in order to test whether you really have got the phonological awareness and the ability to identify the sounds, that's right, to identify the sounds in a word and to read through segmenting and blending, so breaking the word down into the smallest components, the individual phonemes. The way to check that a child can actually do that they know their letter sound correspondence, we say, is by using completely made up words.
Words.
And that is sort of like the purest way, if you like, of testing the phonological ability, the phonics that the children have got.
And we know, because I know you researched right the way back to, was it Alpha and Omega was the very first kind of
yeah. And they were saying that in fact you take away the visual component because you want to really work on the sound. And I mean, this goes back to the spelling wars, really, and the reading wars, because a lot of the post-war teaching was through the visual method, just look and say. And so therefore they thought, well, that was discredited, that didn't work. So therefore, and as often in the world, that doesn't work. Then we'll go to something completely different. So we'll cut out all the visual stuff and we'll just look at the sounds, because they need to know the sound structure. And you go, what? And then they even cut out the meaning because they just want to look at
so you take away any,
you take away all those, and the brain.
When children are reading, their first early books have lots of pictures.
The pictures and the context and the meaning, and how you're making meaning inside the brain, and to take away these, to sort of split out these three parts is just a nonsense as far as I can make out. I mean, I'm only a head teacher, but
well, I suppose a lot of people would say, but it works for 80% of the population. So what are you talking about? But we know that really what's happening is that those people that it's working for are actually, without realizing it, actually using the whole brain system, the visual, the meaning, and the sounds together, without being explicitly shown how to do that. So even though the sound element is the focus, they are actually developing their own visual word bank automatically. And they must, because we know from the research in Georgetown University that once a word has been learned, we don't segment and blend it once we know it and it's in the long-term memory, and then we see it. It's called rapid automatic naming. You actually recognize it rather than decoding it in terms of segmenting and blending. And some people are saying, well, no, we're very, very rapidly segmenting and blending. But the reality is, if you think about the passage that we showed you at the beginning, it wasn't so much about the segmenting and blending. You probably already knew how to read those words, but the fact that the meaning was completely wrong, in the context of that paragraph. Whereas once you saw the correct one, you probably flew through it.
Yeah.
And that it is about that. It is about the visual, and we also know from studies that the predominant sense that you actually use for reading and spelling is visual. There's one element which is the sound. It is important, of course. Language is all about sound, but the written word, which is a man-made invention, it's not. We don't have a reading or spelling center.
Absolutely.
It is a man-made invention, and we hijack, or we basically piggyback onto these areas of the brain in order to actually be able to do this. And it is networks. It's not one cortex, it's not one little area of the brain that is the necessary part. It's the networks. It's how they all work in conjunction with each other.
Yeah, and as teachers, it's absolutely vital. Two things are really vital. Is one, to know that it's developing those visual skills is just as important as developing the phonological skills, and also developing the ability to make meaning from words, the meaning of the words. Those three are absolutely vital in working together. And then the next step is, it's not only important to present the teaching in terms of visual and the auditory and the meaning, but it's also to think, well, what it actually is the child hearing? Because a lot of children find it very, very difficult to hear the difference between a and e, for example, and even
m and
I. And then you've got different accents and different things. And then little children will have glue ear. They'll have all sorts of hearing difficulties. And it's what is actually happening. What are they hearing? How are they interpreting that inside the brain?
I had an expression which is the undifferentiated brain. So that when we're born, loud sounds and soft sounds are basically, that's the difference. That's what we hear, loud and soft. And then as our brains develop and as the networks develop and as we start to link, language and everything else, we start to differentiate between the different sounds. But for some children, that differentiation, it doesn't happen at the small level, which is the phonemes. It to actually be able to, phonemes, to be able to actually differentiate between those. They sound exactly the same.
Yes, absolutely. And then there's the sequencing too, because there's something in the brain that isn't, you might hear but in the once it's gone through that phonological, it just gets jumbled up.
Well, I mean, this is true. Someone went at horse.
I like it. Oh, gosh.
What? So for people who can read and for who segmenting and blending is so obvious, and it's so, well, that makes sense. Absolutely. You break it down and put it back together again. For some people, and also again, if you think about it, the phonological aspect in the brain is often, with segmenting and blending, it is a loop. You're having to hold one piece, then you get the next piece, then you're trying to marry the, blend those together. And then if you have a very long word, by the time you've got to 3 or 4, pieces, you've forgotten what's at the beginning.
Yep.
It's very hard to hold on to that because we know short-term memory, 15 to 30 seconds. Whereas if you're using more of your long-term memory and you recognize it and and pictures, if the picture is 1,000 words, the whole visual aspect of it is so much easier to use. It's our fastest recording system. We can see things, we can see multiple things at the same time.
Absolutely.
Multiple things at the same time.
Yeah.
It's a very different system, and it's not about getting rid of phonics. It's about marrying in the visual and actually coming through, particularly for those students who are really struggling, from what we would call a global learning approach.
Yeah.
So rather than breaking everything apart and trying to teach it piecemeal, we actually use the brain the way, we're using a system.
Exactly, because the mental imagery and the way that people are seeing or not seeing words inside their mind's eye is absolutely vital. And this is where we come in, really, which is how do we help people get that clear and stable mental image of the word inside their mind's eye. And that's what we know. Robert Dills said this is what people need to do. You need to be able to see a word inside your mind's eye in order to spell it. And by see, we don't necessarily mean it in kind of glorious technicolor and all singing, all dancing. It can be like a sense of seeing and so. But for people to spell effectively, to have a really clear, stable image to begin with, and in particular, is very, very important until it becomes so unconscious that it's so fast. And we need to investigate.
And again, it's reducing the cognitive load, isn't it?
It's reducing the cognitive load. Absolutely.
If you're struggling with segmenting and blending,
every single time you come across a word, without having that automatic rapid naming, exactly, the load on the cognitive memory is huge. You're not enjoying your reading. You're not getting the meaning from your reading. The reading isn't fluid. It's very clunky, very chunky, and there's no enjoyment there. So there's a whole lot more to reading than just being able to decode text.
Absolutely. You're not. Someone said you're not just barking at the word. You're not barking at the page. And when someone is not making meaning because they don't have intonation. It's very hard to have punctuation, have intonation, and to have any enjoyment whatsoever. I mean, whenever I hear, oh, my child hates reading, or a child is telling me I hate reading, I know immediately what they're not doing is they're not using their mental imagery. They're not creating, the pictures or the videos inside their heads that makes reading, so enjoyable. I always ask the question, have you ever read a book, thoroughly enjoyed it, and then gone to watch the movie and been bitterly disappointed? And why? Well, because you don't have a budget constraint inside your head. You can have any actor or actress as you wanted, or the scenery is fantastic, and then you're watching somebody else's interpretation, what they created in their mental imagery that they then put on the screen, and it's very different. So helping children, number one, to read obviously something that they're genuinely interested in helps, instead of some of the text. I know certainly from my son, some of the stuff that comes home, he has zero interest in it, and he can read now. I've used this process with both of my children with huge success, especially my older child, who essentially had to have grommets put in his. He was deaf basically until the grommets were put in, and then suddenly the whole world, the volume had been turned up. So he was one of those children that was sitting in class, very early days, age 5, unable to hear. And all instruction was through the sounds and the sounding out, and they didn't really, and he was really, really struggling. And the minute I discovered this, I started using it, and within 2 weeks his spelling had improved beyond anything I could have dreamt was possible, and it was the same for my younger child as well. So when we talk about a global learning approach, this is kind of what we mean. So the cornerstone of everything, of course, is being in an effective learning state. So we're not going to take you through the process because we don't have enough time on these calls, but the whole process is step by step. We take you through it step by step on the online training. And the first thing is about being grounded. And we know the importance of this because the working memory is not just a machine that just constantly working away no matter what. It is absolutely impacted by how you feel. When you are in a state of calm and your body's calm and your mind is open, which is our optimal learning state, then all the pieces of the puzzle work put together and all the pieces of the machinery, that those networks can actually communicate really, really effectively. And not only just within the working memory, but between the, what's happening, the information coming in and what we already know. Those pathways are lovely and clear, and away we go. So when you're doing something you enjoy, it doesn't feel like learning, does it? Because you're not having to fall, there's no effort involved. Right. Whereas I know personally, the minute you're in a state of stress and anxiety and worry and panic maybe, those networks actually will not function as well as they maybe not at all for some people, depending on the level of panic. So without being grounded, without being in an optimal learning state, particularly for children who have been struggling and probably don't feel great, none of this is really going to work. So you have to establish that as part of the whole process too. So if we use like giraffe, straight away the semantic, so this is coming back to Olive again, which this is all about. The genius is to start with concrete nouns because you've already got two of the components.
Yes.
We've already got the semantic component and the phonological component. We know most children, if you show them a picture of a giraffe, would say giraffe, and that's how you pronounce it. And it's only after you've activated those in the brain that you then add on the orthographic component, the actual spelling. So we're teaching it all the networks coming in together.
Yes, because our approach is different because we would start with the big picture, which is the as you say, the meaning and the visual. Whereas in the way that they teach synthetic phonics is by just taking away the visual. Okay, the meaning is there, but you would say giraffe, and the children would have to identify the phonemes in there. What are the sounds in that word without any visual support? So it'd be and then and that's really quite difficult with giraffe. You wouldn't start with giraffe. You probably start with dog or something like that.
But, no.
Or cat. But that's the thing. So you're starting from the sound, whereas we would say, actually, let's give them the context. Let's give them the whole word. Let's give them the and of course, then the argument comes in. Oh, but that's look and say. This whole word learning, look and say, it doesn't work. No, it didn't work because it didn't have the focus on the internal representation that brain creates. Because when I show you the word giraffe, what is happening inside your brain?
Exactly. And I think the big thing as well is that whilst phonics does, is a great word attack skill system, teaching children how to segment and blend and how to kind of it's fantastic, and I mean we use it when we're tackling a word we've never seen before.
Absolutely.
But again, it's at best in terms of the pronunciation, because the English language is nuts, let's face it. And you found some rather funny stuff this week, didn't you, around
because in fact some people are trying to say, because they're trying to defend synthetic phonics, and people are saying, but what about the words that are not phonetically regular, the irregular words, or sometimes they're called the tricky words, aren't they? Which is an interesting word, setting up a belief that it's going to be really tricky and really hard. And there's something called structural word inquiry, which seeks to say that in fact you can make a rule for everything in the English language, but I find that really hard to come about, because
certainly to teach a 4 or 5 year old.
To teach a 4 or 5 year old, yes, so that exactly. Yes, because if you think about the development of English. I mean, it's got roots in Germanic languages, the French language, Latin and Greek. And, you know, up until really quite recently, about sort of mid 18th century, around about 1750, you know, people would just make up their own spellings. As we were talking about at the very beginning of the talk, why can't we go back to that? I mean, Shakespeare himself wrote his own word, his own name, several different ways throughout his life, because you could just choose. And they also call it's something called the Great Vowel Shift, which happened between about 1300 and 1750, where people were beginning to get some sort of agreement because of printing presses of what the language would be like. And of course, language is always evolving. Yeah. And I mean, if we take, for example, the word knife, and we know that we spell it K-N-I-F-E, well, that's because originally it actually was pronounced kniffy.
Oh,
something
really?
like that. That
we
was
jokingly call it a kniffy at home.
A kniffy, yes, that's right. But eventually it got changed. In the Great Vowel, I think it was knifey or something. Anyway, the sounds just change over time, and this is the point. But the spelling remained the same. And then the interesting one is laugh. It used to be pronounced. If I can, yeah, lauche.
Oh, okay.
From the Germanic, so it was, and that's why we get laugh, because lauche, the L-A-U,
sound in our language,
and because that's disappeared out of our language, and then they've used the GH to create the h sound at the end. So wow. I mean, English is, I mean, the history of the language is absolutely fascinating when you think of the different ways they try to spell, because we've got 26 basic letters now, and over time they've had all sorts of different letters. They haven't always had just those 26. There have been different ways of trying to capture the sounds of English and write them down. And we've got 26 basic letters, and there are 44 basic sounds, vowel sounds and consonant sounds. So you're using only 26 letters in order to create 44 phonemes, the basic sounds of English. When you come to how you write it, the orthographic component, well, there are 89 main ones, but people have really tried to find out how many different ways there are to write down the sounds of the English language, what we know as the 44 main sounds. And some people have come up with like 238. Somebody has discovered, other people have said there are thousands, because there are some sounds that are really quite different.
Sometimes there's one word that uses,
there's only one word
particular combination of letters for that, and the sound could have been, I mean, it could have been created in multiple different ways.
Yes. Yeah.
And we know that even just from the sound, say like A, you know, A, that sound can be written how many different ways?
Oh, I mean, right, because you've got A itself, AI. What else have you got? You've got AY. You've got, sometimes you've got, is there any way that I mean, if you take ones I've actually sort of written down here, so I don't have to think. My brain's getting slow in my old age. So if you think of the sound O, you've got like stone, yeah, toe, so, road, and flow.
Yes, multiple ways for the same sound. So our argument is that whilst the phonics approach is important in terms of being able to segment and blend brand new words that you've never seen before, the reality is actually, if you go through a more global learning approach, essentially what you're doing is you're really helping children to, I'm just going to show this whole slide rather than building up.
Yeah, sure.
We call it the word piggy bank. You know, yeah. It's the visual word bank. So that's why this does take time with some students, because you've got to build up the word bank. It's not just going to be, right, I'm going to show you this process, boom, that's it. You know, you start with concrete nouns, you move on to the more abstract words and all the other words in terms of how you do it. We're not going to go through the whole process here because it would take too long. No. But the end result is that by having more and more words stored visually, which we understand the meaning, so we have a visual bank of how the word looks, and we have the dictionary element, we understand what it means depending on the context, etc. That actually by going in through the spelling route, and learning how to spell these words, we're actually also teaching how to read simultaneously.
Yes.
Whereas the phonics route is not teaching spelling, it's really just for reading, because you can't use that approach just, you can't use it the other way. Because of this orthographic depth of the English language, we have these multiple ways of spelling the sound, of creating those sounds with those letters. So we have to know what is the correct spelling, and obviously that was agreed upon however many years ago. And even if and most of them do seem completely and utterly crazy, I have to say. I mean, you were saying the word indite. They just threw a C in to make it look more Latin.
I mean, indite, yes, because in fact the word to indict used to be spelled INDITE, but they wanted to make it more Latinate, because you had lots of different people. We never in our country, we never had, like in France, they've got the what's it called, the Académie Française, anyway, something that really establishes the French language and makes agreement about how. We never had that process here to actually construct or to sort out all the spellings that were around, because obviously you had different spellings from different regions in the country. There was never a sort of systematic approach to say, let's organize English spelling. It's evolved over time, as you said, and I think children have a huge problem, some children even getting those basic 26 sounds, that the letter C says k, and then even more struggle to get those 44 phonemes. And then when they come to the next step, which is to do those graphemes, the way you write it. Oh, I know a little girl, for example, she had struggled, she came to be about 10 years old. She had struggled all those years to get her basic sounds so she could actually write phonetically. And she went to write pencil, and she'd written pencil PENSLE. And because she'd learnt sort of table, she'd learnt the at the end, and I kind of had to show her that pencil was actually IL, and she burst into tears because she'd worked so hard to get the sound at the end, not just an L, but there was an LE at the end, which is bizarre anyway. Why didn't you just have it? So she said, well, I thought, well, why isn't an L, just an L, enough? And then she'd worked so hard to get the LE, and okay, you could say pencil is pronounced slightly differently from table, but in effect we do go pencil, table. It's hard to distinguish those.
Paula, I mean, you mentioned earlier, which is different accents.
And the different accents you might have.
I mean, the reality
grass and grass.
We don't all pronounce the phonemes the same way.
No.
But we do all spell the same way in terms of English. It doesn't matter whether you've got an Australian, well, because you have American spelling and English spelling, and that will take that kind of component out of this equation, because again, you and I would be able to look at a word and go, well, I know an American wrote that, and I know an English, someone who's using the English spelling has written that, because of the differences there. And so again, it's recognizing, it's still the visual recognition that's actually involved. Whereas if you only use the pronunciation as the main route in, you're going to get children really, really struggling. And a lot of people say, yes, but you'll still have, and the question, of course, is, okay, so if we did go to a more uniform spelling, route, excuse me, in English, surely that would take away the problem. And we know, for example, I think Finnish is it 26 letters or 29 letters and 31 phonemes?
Pretty much that. It's a very shallow, and talk about orthographic depth, it's a very shallow language, but you still have incidents of dyslexia. So even if you have a pretty shallow orthographic depth, where basically one word, one letter corresponds to one sound, you still get dyslexic symptoms.
Absolutely, and we know it's because of the instability of the mental imagery.
Absolutely.
And those words are not being transferred into the visual word bank, into the long-term memory for that rapid automatic naming. The bigger, and I know from Shane McCarthy, his school was the amazing pilot school that I worked with. Oh gosh, coming up to 7 years now. It's really it's amazing how long they've been using this system for. And what they have noticed is that as time has gone on, you know, not only did they see fantastic spelling results immediately on a Friday, you know, once they started to introduce this across the entire school, by the way, this was not used as an intervention only, it was very much, well, let's give everybody this skill. And those who were using it kind of go, oh, I'm doing this already. And those who weren't, you know, you could transfer it to other subjects, etc. But what they noticed was that as the words were being learnt this way, and children's visual word bank was increasing, that year on year, those children's spelling, you know, the final standardized testing that they would use, year on year increased. You know, it was a steady growth because they were building up that word bank, and as long as they were tested on words they'd seen, you know.
Yes.
And that's where a lot of this comes in, because you go, well, I can just well, should we try our audience out with some words and just see what it's like to try and spell words you've never seen or heard?
Oh right, yes, we can do that. I tried this with my husband last night, actually, with Martin, and it was interesting because I said to him, I'll give you the first word to spell. Think about it. How would you? Just going to ask you how you would spell it.
I don't know, by the way, I haven't seen this word, so
you haven't seen it, so you don't know. So the word is taggle. It's a Scottish word, taggle. And I said that to my husband. He said table, and I said no, taggle. And the first thing he said to me was, well, I don't know what that means.
Exactly.
That's, you know, so his brain was searching.
So before you tell us what it means,
I'm not going to tell you what it means yet. No.
So we've got a few people watching. So if you're watching, just stick in your what do you think, without using spell check, or Google. Just type in how you think taggle is spelled. I've got an idea in my head. I'm probably wrong. Okay. So
what did you think, Sarah?
I immediately thought maybe Tagle.
Yes, because you're probably linking with your previous knowledge of table, like, and Martin did exactly the same.
Yeah. Oh, someone's put Taegle.
Right. Yes, because the AE together often makes an A sound, doesn't it?
Yeah. Any more? No one else brave enough to put in their version? Do you want to put us out of your misery?
I'll put you all out of your misery.
Put us out of our misery. Sorry, rather.
Taigle.
Ah. Okay. Yeah. No, Lucy Tachel. Yeah. So no, none of us were right.
Yes, it could be EL. Yes, it could be taggle at the end, like a label, for example. Label's got EL at the end.
Says she would spell it like I did, table, taggle, or maybe Tagel. Yeah. So we've all, you know, and I think this is the point, because you would just go, well, surely if you've learned phonics, you can basically spell any word. You just have to use the whole, you know, that approach, and any word can be spelled. And yes, you can, but it is a guess at best.
It's and unless you have seen it, unless you know it, unless you have seen it, and you have got a stable image stored inside your mind's eye. Otherwise, you're not going to be able to spell it again when you come to it. And this is the you see, I don't know why, but to me it just seems so simple and so logical.
I know.
But why would I thought when we were talking last week, Joe, it suddenly struck me that we're trying to teach people how to spell and to read, tying one hand behind their backs, and then we said put a blindfold on.
Put a blindfold.
Because we are restricting the brain. We are cutting off routes to learning by not embracing that you need to teach visual skills, teach those internal visual processes. And obviously you need to teach the sounds and how to segment and blend. Yes, I've got all that. But we need to be looking more holistically at how the brain works, how the brain develops networks, and how we can use the brilliant idea of brain plasticity. You know, the brain is not fixed.
No.
You can develop new ways, new pathways. Okay, you might not end up being the most, you know, phenomenal spelling bee in the entire world, but you can have a bit more of a clue, a bit more of a support, a bit more of a help. And then at least you will know that actually I wasn't just stupid and I wasn't lazy. It was because, you know, I didn't have that underlying skill, and now I've got that skill. I can actually learn this much more easily and much more effectively than I did before.
Absolutely. And it is frustrating for us, because we have seen the success with children who have struggled for years and years and years. And then they come for a session, and in an hour and a half, they're able to spell sometimes 6-7 letter words that they've never, and multiple, I've just had parents sitting there absolutely gobsmacked, looking at their children who normally on a Thursday there is this huge battle before the Friday test, the spelling test. And of course, some people say, well, the solution is, don't do any spelling tests. And that a little bit like Donald Trump yesterday saying, well, let's stop testing for COVID-19 and then we won't have as many cases. I mean, it really is the same, isn't it? It's like, well, don't do the spelling test. And then we won't have a problem with spelling. It's like, no, you will still have, in fact, I'm not a huge advocate of testing all the time, but I think it's very good feedback for the student and for the teacher to know, well, are they getting it? And rather than just, well, no, just, go back and write it 3 times each one that you've got wrong. It's like, well, hang on a minute, let's go another step and let's coach the child to see exactly as you were saying, what is happening inside the child's mind. Are they seeing the word? I got asked, for the first year I worked with Shea School, I was in and out, helping the teachers to figure out really how to implement this within the mainstream classroom. And I remember one little girl, they said, can you look, we've tried every which way. She's still struggling a bit with her spelling. She's doing phenomenally much better. I mean, really incredible results, but she's still not getting all of her spellings right. And I was thinking, okay, well, it's not about 100%, but she wanted to get 100% because she was getting sort of, 17 out of 20, but not the 20 out of 20. So I went in and I straight away said, okay, show me your spelling book and let's have a look. And it's always about going back and let's see, well, the ones that, first of all, did she remember the ones she got right long term, which she did, which was great. But the ones she was getting wrong, I was looking at them and I said, okay, so let's pick out this one. Do you know what that word means? No. Do you know what another one she got wrong? Do you know what this one means? No. So she didn't have that semantic component. And it's like, well, it's like me showing you how to spell something in Arabic that you have no idea what it means. You know what it sounds, everything else, but actually your brain loves connections. It wants to know which filing cabinet to put this into in order so that you can then, recall it, easily. And without those networks all being, there's a great expression in neuroscience, neurons that fire together wire together. So you are wiring this information together. The more networks, the more information. And people go, oh, I can't overload a 4-year-old with all of this. Actually, that's how their brains are working. Their brains are already doing this. You're not overloading it at all. You're actually helping it because you've got multiple routes, into that language, into the language aspect in terms of the written language. So, we are still offering the course for free. If you get, this is our main website, so you might see a couple of different links. One goes straight to the courses, and you can just click on the parents one. But this has a lot of other information. There's also a test that you can have a look, a little checklist. It's not an assessment. It's just an idea, because I know personally one of the things I always thought dyslexia was letter reversals, but actually there's all kinds of things that can come out. But predominantly is really looking at the visual aspect too. Paula, according to my watch, it's 10 o'clock. I don't know about you. Are we bang on time?
Yes, it is 10. We are bang on time. My goodness me.
Bang on time today. So just want to say thanks to everybody who regularly join us, and then thanks to everyone who watches this regularly as well.
Oh, thank you.
Of the recording.
Yes, we've got quite a few people who are watching us now, haven't we? Which is lovely.
It's fantastic, and we really appreciate it. We appreciate as well you sharing it. Send it on to your friends or family, or even maybe your child's teacher, because we have an online course for teachers as well. We just want to help as many people in the world as possible to get past this block, to be able to free their minds and for them to be able to really tap into their true potential. Anne-Marie says thanks again, ladies, and thank you so much. Thanks, everyone who tunes in and watches us regularly. We're so grateful for that.
Thank you.
And we just feel like we're no longer just talking to each other about this.
I know.
Out there. We're getting a little bit of traction, which is fantastic. So everyone have a fantastic week, and we will be back next Wednesday.
Have a good week. Thank you very much, everybody, for joining us. Bye-bye.